When two people agree about everything, one of them is unnecessary. Think about that for a while. If two people agree about everything, one of them is not necessary. Right, so really, once again, trying to change your spouse to be like you makes no sense at all. I don't want my wife to be like me, I already have me. I want her because she is different. Because together she brings perspectives and ways of thinking about things that I never think of. That adds value and love and experience to me that you can never get by yourself. Love, by its very definition, requires two, as we said this morning. There's a reason why God is a triune God. This notion that Jesus is created is simply impossible, because if Jesus had an origin, then therefore there has to be a time where he was not. And if there's a time he was not, you have only God. And how can God be love if he's the only one? It's not possible. True love requires plurality. It's not possible otherwise. So just think about that. So we don't want to be changing anybody to become like us. Rather, learn what the differences are, and then learn how to deal with those. Learn how to treat your spouse according to your spouse's needs, etc. So this afternoon I'm going to be talking a little bit about expectations. What expectations do you have of marriage? What expectations do you have of your spouse? And I want to do a little bit of introspection this afternoon and start by asking the question, are your expectations of your spouse reasonable? Are they reasonable? Many people have expectations of their spouses that's not reasonable. Are your expectations of your spouse noble and pure? Can I be here? I get an echo. Okay. Let me go back. I do get an echo, and I don't want the recording to be harmed. Okay. Another question. Are your motives and expectations based upon selfishness? Think about these things. I'm more comfortable being with you guys. Can you stand the hum? Okay. So really ask those type of questions. Are my expectations reasonable? Are they pure? Are they based upon selfishness? I expect this of you because that's what I want, versus what's good for the relationship, versus what's good for you. Examine your motives. Examine your expectations. Why do you have them? Many marital problems are there because kids growing up have some need, human need, that was never fulfilled. And now they get into marriage, and their sole desire in life is to have their marriage partner fulfill those unmet needs. I see that all the time. And those marriages typically don't last. You got to examine your expectations. You got to examine your needs. Now, some of us may have needs that have gone unmet from our growing up years, but we have to deal with them in a different way. It's fine to explain them to our wives and our husbands and discuss it together and talk it out and get it healed, etc. But you can't expect your spouse to be what a parent wasn't. or to fix somebody that somebody else ruined. Because then you're expecting something, you're placing a burden on your spouse, which is hard to bear. And that's not necessarily that person's expertise or problem to deal with. So think about these things as we move along. And ask yourself, if you were to evaluate your marriage right now, do you have needs that is not being met? Many couples have needs that are not being met, but yet they won't tell each other. You can't do anything about something you don't know. If it's not brought to your attention, there's nothing you can do about it. The first step of any change is awareness, always awareness. So make sure you have these discussions. Sit your spouse down and say, how are things going with us? Do you have any expectations that I'm not fulfilling, that I'm not meeting? I may not be able to, but let's discuss. What expectations do you really have? And sometimes we have expectations and we don't even know about them. We've not really voiced them or really thought about the question really. But many of the things that drive our behavior in marriage are because of this reason. So think about these things as we get into this afternoon. So I'd like to read a text to you and then spend all afternoon unpacking this text and what that means and how that looks like in a relationship. The text comes from Philippians 2, and I know it doesn't necessarily speak about marriage, but I'm going to be naughty and I'm going to be applying it to marriage today. Philippians 2, 1-4. It's Paul writing, and he says the following. Now, you have to understand, when we go to college to study theology, you cannot get a theological degree without biblical languages. That's one of the major differences between theology and pastoral ministry, or theology and religion, or theology and biblical studies. With theology, you can't graduate unless you pass biblical languages. And so when they start teaching us Greek, which is a nightmare, there's more exceptions than rules and stuff, they always start with the writings of John, because John writes very simplistic Greek. He uses short sentences, short phrases, etc. And then when you graduate, you end up with Paul, because his Greek is convoluted sentences that run for lines, etc. And this is a prime example of that. Look at this sentence. If there is therefore any encouragement in Christ, if any comfort of love, in any fellowship in the Spirit, if any tenderness and mercies, then, and he continues. So I want you to see what he says here. If there's encouragement in Christ, if there's comfort in love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if there's tenderness of mercies. Now these are the things that marriage should be filled with, right? Your marriage should give you comfort in love. Your marriage should be tenderness, mercies, fellowship together, and with the Spirit, encouragement. This is what marriage should be all about. So he says, if you're going to have those things, then here's how you do that. So do you see the sentence construction? If you're going to have this, 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 then do that. So let's see what he says we ought to do. And that's the 7 points that I'm going to be basing this afternoon on. Here are the 7 points that Paul says you need to do if you want those things. Number 1, then fill my joy. Number 2, that you may be like-minded. Number 3, having the same love. Number 4, being of one accord and of one mind. Let nothing be done in strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem each other better than themselves. Do not let each man look upon his own things, but each man also on the things of others. There's your recipe. If you can do those 7 things in marriage, your relationship will be wonderful. Let's unpack each one of them. Number 1, fulfill each other's joy. Yes, it's Philippians chapter 2, 1-4. Fulfill your spouse's joy. E.G. White makes a very interesting comment. She says, love a marriage is a foretaste of heaven. You know, she said that? A great marriage and love is a foretaste of heaven. That's what a marriage should be. It should be that wonderful. But then she says, love is like a plant that needs to be nurtured. So I want to ask you this question. How do you nurture a plant? How do you take care of a plant? Please tell me. Fertilize, water, sun. Okay, now, what if I were to tell you you're all wrong? Okay, because you're actually right, but you're wrong as well. Because before you do any of those things, there's a step that needs to precede it. Let's say you have the plant already. You have the plant already. I give you a gift. Here's the plant. Take care of it. What do you need to do before any of these things you've mentioned? I've lost you guys. I'm sorry. Here's the deal. Before you can do anything, you have to first study the plant. Because if you don't, and you give your cactus water, it dies. If you give your plant that only wants shade into the sun, it dies. No matter what you said, there are some plants, if you were to do that, they will die. So the first thing when you get a plant is you can't just say, oh, well, plants are plants, and treat them all the same. You can't do that. If you want a successful plant, you have to study the plant. And you got to figure out, is this a shade plant or a sun plant? Is this a water plant or a dry plant? A teaspoon of water a week or every day? You got to study the plant. What does this plant need in order to succeed? Otherwise, your plant dies. Now remember, E.G. White said, love is like a plant that needs to be nurtured. So now let's apply it to marriage, because she does. She uses it as a metaphor for marriage. So let's apply that to marriage. How does that work? Before you can supply the needs of your spouse, you need to study your spouse. That's part of why I do these seminars all over the place. I'm trying to educate people about the differences of men and women, because we don't know about them. Men think like men, and they want to treat their spouses that makes logical sense to them, and vice versa. And then they wonder why the plant dies. So I'm trying to study the plant and then educate you guys to know how to treat the plant, because the plant is not like you're used to. It's not the same as you. It's different. So Paul says the key number one to a great relationship and a great marriage is to fulfill the other person's joy, which may be very different from the way your joy gets filled. So make sure you study each other. Sit together and say, what brings you joy in life? What are your dreams in life? What flattens your battery quickly? You got to ask these type of questions. And then once you know, give them joy. You'll be amazed. There's a guy by the name of Dr. John Gottman. He's a Jewish guy, and he's a legend in marriage research, a legend. This guy established what is called the Love Lab in Seattle. It's an apartment that's rigged with one-way glass that their psychologist observers can look through and observe people. It's rigged with cameras and mics and stuff all over the place. And you go there as a couple for a weekend, and they record and watch everything you do. Obviously not in the restroom. And they stop everything by 9 o'clock, so you've got privacy from 9 o'clock till 9 o'clock the next morning. But otherwise, they watch you all weekend. This is how this love lab started some 30 years ago. This guy has got it down so much now that Dr. John Gottman can meet you and your spouse, spend 5 minutes with you, and predict with a 92% accuracy whether your marriage will last. He's learned what to look for and what to see. Yes. John Gottman. Gottman. John Gottman. So John Gottman, before he became this world-famous scholar, this multiple published guy that when he publishes a book, it goes wild because he's a pioneer in marriage research. Before he had the name, he goes to a publisher with his book. They already accepted his book to be published, but they weren't really marketing it or spending a lot of money. So he made an appointment to see the publisher, and he said to the publisher, this book is going to be a major hit. Please invest lots of money in the advertising to make this book go. It's really going to be huge. And the publishing executive said, yeah, right. He really wasn't that interested. No matter what John said to him, he just wasn't interested. So eventually, he saw that John was not giving up. And he looked John in the eye and he said, I give you 30 seconds. Tell me in 30 seconds what difference I can make in my marriage now to make a difference. 30 seconds, go. John Gottman said, how do you summarize? How do you summarize a book in 30 seconds? How do I know what this guy's need is, what to even address? I don't know him. I don't know his personal life. John didn't know what to say. And he wasted almost all of his 30 seconds thinking. But the clock was ticking. Eventually, it ticked down. He literally had 5-6 seconds left. He didn't know what to say. He was sitting there in silence. And he said to the guy, fulfill your wife's dreams. Exactly, just different words. Fulfill my joy. Now, the guy looked at him and he said, picked up his coat, threw it over his shoulder, and walked out. He didn't greet John. He didn't say, yes, I'm going to publish, I'm going to market your book, or no, nothing. He just walked out. He left. A week or so later, he got a call from this gentleman. We've decided to invest massive money in your book. And John says, why, what happened? It couldn't have been from what I said. You stumped me. I never thought about that question, and I didn't have enough time to think and prepare an answer, and so I just said what came out. And I thought that you were so mad at me that you just took your jacket and left. The executive says over the phone, no, sir, you don't understand. When you told me to fulfill my wife's dream, it dawned on me. I don't know what her dreams are. He took his jacket and went home. He opened the door and went inside. His wife looked at him and she said, you're home early. You've never been home this early. Have you been fired? He sat his wife down and he said to her, honey, what are your dreams? She burst out crying and she said to him, I thought you'd never ask. They've been married for years. We're so wrapped up in chasing our dreams, in chasing that which brings us joy, that we completely forget what the joy is, what the dreams are of your spouse. Paul reverses it. Paul says, if you want a happy marriage, don't go and chase your joy. Fulfill your spouse's joy. And I'm adding to Paul, you can't do that until you've studied and asked. Sit your spouses down and find out, what are your dreams? What brings you joy? What brings you hurt? Get to know those intimate desires and then fulfill them. Do whatever you can to bring joy to the relationship. Point number 2, be like-minded. Now you'll notice Paul uses the same thing 2 or 3 times in the 7. He uses different words, but he repeats it, so it must be important. He says, be like-minded. Then he says, have the same love. It's pretty similar, right? Then he says, be of one accord and of one mind. I mean, 3 points in a row he says that. So it must be important. It must be very important. So what does Paul mean by be like-minded? Well, it's exactly what we preached about this morning. You're a unit. Your core values agree. But it basically means this. The two of you become a team. So let's talk about conflict just for a minute. Assume that your spouse comes in every day from work, undresses, dumps the clothing, the underwear, and the socks right in the middle of the floor, and walks off. How do you deal with that problem? Now, most people, in most marriages, attack the person. Honey, you're untidy. In fact, the word you is the most common word used when we fight. That's the word you say most in any fight. You don't understand. You do this. You. So, she can attack me. You're untidy. I'm the problem. It's her against me. Or, you can choose to be a team. And now, it's not me against you. It's us against the problem. Instead of telling me that I am untidy, she can now say to me, we have a problem. There's always stuff on the floor. How can we solve it? That's much better than being attacked. Right? Now we're a team. By the way, if you were to deal with your job the way you deal with conflict in your marriage, you will be fired. Let me explain what I mean. When you have a problem at work, what do? No, I'm not talking about that type of problem. I mean, your job is to solve some type of problem. I mean, look, all employment on earth is to solve some problem. Do you agree with that? Is there any employment that does not solve some problem? Even entertainment is to solve a problem. Stress, relaxation, etc. So work resolves some problem. It's your job to solve some problem. So when a difficulty or something comes, what's your job? Is to solve it, right? So you spend most of your energy solving problems. Now, evaluate your fight you have at home. And answer me just one question. What percentage of the time you spent in the fight did you focus on solving the problem? 0. That's why I say, if you were to do your work like you fight at home, I'm not talking about yelling and stuff, you will be fired because you're not solving the problem. We spend 90%, 99% of the fight justifying our own behavior and blaming and attacking the other person. We spend no time whatsoever problem solving. And then we wonder why we fight about the same thing over and over again. If you want the conflict to go away, solve the conflict. Sit together, be a team, be like-minded and say, this thing is getting in between us. This thing is ruining our relationship. How can we solve that? I'm not attacking you, you're not attacking me, I'm not fault-finding, I'm not blaming, I'm not justifying my behavior. Let us as a team problem solve. Think about that. Paul says, if you want a happy marriage, be like-minded. And like-minded means you are a team. You work together. You're going to put your heads together to deal with this thing. Now, for those of you who have kids, let me just tell you, it's not a parenting class today, but you can get the book on parenting if you want to. If you don't parent as a team, they will parent you. If you do not parent as a team, if you are not like-minded in your parenting, if you do not agree on how we're going to discipline, what we're going to discipline, what we're going to teach, what we're going to tolerate, etc. If you don't agree on those things, they're masters at figuring out who will say yes to what. They'll go and ask you, Dad, for this thing because they know you're going to say yes and she'll say no when I ask her, so I'll go and ask you. But tomorrow, I know on this topic, I'll need to ask Mom because he's going to say no. Kids will drive a wedge between you and cause problems. They will even do unethical things like, Dad, I'd like to go and do this thing. If it's okay with you, it'll be okay with Mom. So Dad thinks, well, if it's okay with Mom, oh, okay. So go to Mom. Mom, I want to do this thing. Dad said it's okay if it's okay with you. I let him think that she already approved. As long as he says yes. Oh, well, okay, if Mom says yes, okay. Then I go to her and I do the same thing. I make each think that the other one approved it. Kids do these type of things. You got to parent together. You got to be a team. You got to be like-minded. You got to agree on these things. And it's not just parenting. The same thing about life. Your core principles, etc. You got to agree. So let me tell you a quick story. Because kids try these things. For the last 4.5 years, up until August, I was running the HR department at the conference and personnel. So every single week, I work with lawyers. We get sued every other week. Yeah, I know you can't believe it, but that's true. A lady calls me. One of our churches in San Francisco had a health fair. And so they went to a shopping mall and put the flyers of the health clinic on the windshields. This lady calls me Monday morning. Your flyer broke my car's windshield. I politely say to the lady, dear ma'am, I tell you what, not only will I replace your windshield, but I'll buy you a new car, a brand new car, if you can demonstrate, even forcibly, if you can demonstrate how a single sheet of paper can break a car's windshield. But we deal with these things, and sometimes more serious things. But in any case, so I work with lawyers every week, and I begin to think like they do. So eventually, I'm so used to thinking this way, my son comes home, and there's some school field trip to some place, and he brings me these forms to sign. And I'm thinking like a lawyer, and I say to myself, no, I'm not signing it until I read it. Have you ever read one of those forms? So I read it. You will be shocked. You know what those forms say? Those forms say that once you sign them, you cannot sue them even for preventable negligence that leads to death. That's what those forms say. Not once, not twice, but almost in every paragraph. And it's bolded. The next time you see one of those forms, whether it's kayaking or trampolining or whatever, I challenge you. Just look at the bold. Is it bolded? It's not even hidden. You're signing away negligence that may lead to death. Now, coming from South Africa, it's not a litigious society at all. I can't understand why people sue each other. If an accident happened, my kid dies, life happens, I'm not going to sue anybody. But I think I draw the line with known preventable negligence. If you knew, and it was totally preventable and you did nothing, you want me to just sign that that's okay? No, I'm not going to do that. So, I scratch that out, and I write in there, except for negligence, and I sign it everywhere. Scratch it out, except for negligence, I sign it everywhere. So, of course, my kid's happy, his form is signed, he goes on the first field trip that I do this on, and of course, he gets to the door, and every kid hands it to the guy looks at it, puts it down, next kid hands it down, puts the guy, and of course, then it gets to my kid. My kid hands him, whoa, all the scratches and writing and stuff. So he calls the manager, and of course my boy's embarrassed because all the other kids are just zipped through, and everybody's now waiting for him. Come on, and he's, well, are we going to let this guy in or not? And because now our contract's changed, and etc. But I've never had a place that refused him. Eventually they all say, okay, go. But in any case, he's used to this, and it embarrasses him every single time. And he pleads with me, Dad, don't do that. And I said, but I'll be a horrible dad if I don't. Signing away known preventable negligence that leads to death is not acceptable for me. I love you. I can't do that. So, one afternoon, my wife and I are not home, and my phone rings. We're visiting with some friends, and I pick up the phone, and it's my son. Dad, why is Mom not answering her texts? So, well, I don't know. Maybe the ringer's off or something. I'll check with her. But is there something I can do for you? What do you need? No. Let Mom just look at her texts. Red flag. So, okay. So, of course, I go to my wife's phone. And let me see this text. The text says, and I'm quoting as verbatim as I can, Mom, the church group wants to go trampolining tonight. Can you please go online and complete the paperwork so that I could go? And now what's this sentence? But please, you, not Dad. Please, you, not Dad. He doesn't want me to get hold of the forms. This is the type of thing that kids will try. They know who to go to. They know what to say. They play you. So once again, if you want to have a successful marriage, you have to be of like mind. You have to be a team. You have to do things together. You got to parent together. You got to run your financial planning together. You got to make major decisions together. You are a team. You're like-minded. If you're not, you're going to have issues. Point number 3. Have the same love. What does that mean? What does it mean when it says have the same love? And we could add for one another because the whole thing is reciprocal. Have the same love. Here's the deal. All relationships require risk. You risk being hurt, but the reward is love. Wonderful fulfillment, love, joy, inexplicable peace. And I mean, a great marriage is just awesome. It's a foretaste of heaven. So you're running the risk of being hurt terribly versus a wonderful, blissful, love-filled life. But you can't have the one without the other. All relationships require risk. You either take the risk and then you can get the reward, or if you don't take the risk, forget the reward. So, what this means, have the same love, is each spouse should take the same amount of risk. The minute one loves the other one more than the other one, loves back, you have a problem. It does not work. Human psychology says, the minute you realize that somebody else is not taking equal risk than you, you stop taking risk. You bring yours down to their level. And that changes the whole dynamic of the marriage. Any of you attended any of my seminars before? You guys have? Okay, so excuse me, I'm just going to repeat a section. If you heard it before, I'm sorry. So, let me do a business deal with Pastor here. The pastor and I meet, and I talk to him over lunch about a new business we want to start. And by the time lunch is over, he agrees with me 100% that this is a business we cannot miss. This is a great business. He fully agrees that it's a good business. So that's off the table. There's no disagreement. Now, I say to the pastor, so Pastor, it's going to cost us about $10,000 to make a go of this business. That's what the initial investment is going to be required to make this business run. So, do we have a deal? You invest $9,000, I put in $1,000. Now, why is he laughing at me? Why, there's a problem, right? The minute I do that, what questions is he beginning to ask? He's trying to say, wait a minute, why is this guy not willing to put in as much as what is requiring of me? Is this deal really as good as what he's saying? Because if it was, why would he not be risking? Why is he requiring me to risk more than he's requiring to risk? Now, the exact same thing happens in marriage. If one risks and the other one does not risk, it's just a matter of time before the one who takes all the risk says to him or herself, why am I the only one taking risk here? And the minute you realize that, you drop your risk-taking to the same level as his. The logical thing for the pastor to say is, you put in 1,000, I put in 1,000. You want 10,000, put in 5,000. That's what happens in business, but that's the same thing that happens in love. There's tons of psychological studies out on risk-taking and how this dynamic works. And it only goes up as long as two things happen. Number one, risk-taking is equal. And number two, that every single risk that is taken is rewarded. The minute a risk taken is not rewarded, trust is out the door and you refuse to take risk again. Trust develops very simply. Trust develops by taking a little risk, and whenever that risk is rewarded, your trust in that person grows. Every time you do that, more trust develops. The minute you burned once, it collapses all in one shot. It doesn't go down incrementally. It collapses in all one shot. And the amount of risk taken starts low. Nobody's willing to risk too much too soon. Nobody. If you don't believe me, sir, can you borrow me $10,000?
I don't even have $10,000.
Let's assume you do. Would you?
I don't even know you.
Exactly. The risk is too high. There's a problem. You'll never see me again. But, sir, I forgot my lunch money at home, and I'm just $1 short. Can you loan me $1? I'll pay you back tomorrow.
I'll give you $1.
Why? The risk is small. If I don't pay him, he doesn't get hurt that much. It's not that big of a deal. He can afford to lose $1. He can't afford to lose 10,000. So now, I see him next week, and I pay him back his dollar. What happens to trust? It went up just a wee bit, just a wee bit. Next week, same thing happens. I borrow another $1. I pay him back the week after. What happens to trust? It grows just a little bit. Every week I do this, before long, I have built up a little bit of trust. What happens the following week, and I say to him, I forgot everything today, can you give me 5? He's going to say yes, because he's already done it 10, 20 times, and I've been faithful. Every single time I pay him back, there's been no issue. I've developed trust. So he's willing to increase the amount. And as long as I keep on rewarding the risk he takes, as long as I keep on paying him back, in a week's time I can be at $10, in a month's time I can be at $20, in 3 months' time I can be at $100. In a year or two, if he had $10,000, he would give me $10,000 because I have proven myself faithful. That's how trust develops. And by the time he gives me $10,000, I may have borrowed and repaid back 100 times. But the minute I don't pay him back once, it doesn't go back to number 99 or the level I had 95. It drops to 0. That's how relationships work. We're not talking actually about money. We're talking about relationships. When you decide to love someone and open up the secret chambers of your heart, you're taking a risk of being hurt. If you don't believe me, ask anybody that's been through a divorce or been cheated on, etc. The hurt is incredible. You're taking a risk. But the joy, the love, the fulfillment of a happy marriage is absolutely awesome. So Paul says, you have to have the same love if this marriage thing is going to work. And what that means is you can't have one person building the trust and the other one doesn't. You can't have one person taking the risk and the other one doesn't. Both of you have to take equal risk. So what prevents you from taking risk? Right. Trust in the past has been violated. You've been burnt. And when that happens, when there's psychological pain, we build walls. And we build these walls to keep people out. Because if people are out, we're protected and we can't get hurt. The closer somebody is to you and they hurt you, the more the hurt is intensified. If your spouse calls you a derogatory name, it hurts 100 times more than the stranger you've just cut off on the highway that calls out obscenities to you. Why? Because who's he? It doesn't impact you as much. So the closer you are to a person, the more risk you're taking for being hurt. The further you're away from them, the less hurt because you're not hurt that much. You're not expecting that much, etc. You're not giving that much. And so that's what walls do. They keep people at a distance so that the risk you're taking is minimized. But they come at a tremendous cost. And the cost is that, yes, you're not risking, but you're also not receiving as much love. It numbs you. You can't love as much. And quite often, a second marriage has this barrier where the first marriage or even childhood, the way you were raised, has made you build walls to protect yourself against pain. And now the new person you marry has to pay the price for what the previous person did. Because these walls keep the new person out too. And they can't get as close. And it can take years for that wall to be broken down. But Paul says the ideal marriage, if you want this thing to work and be happy, both have to have the same love. Break those walls down with each other. It's fine to have walls for other people, but break those walls down. You got to have equal risk. You got to have the equal amount of investment in the marriage. Point number 4. Be of one accord and of one mind. Now it's saying the same thing over, just using something else. The word one accord there is actually the Greek word that refers to a symphony. How does a symphony work? A symphony orchestra. Do they all play the same notes? Not at all. Do they all play the same melody? Well, sometimes. Sometimes the trumpet has the melody and the others are just support. But then it changes and this takes the lead. Something else is the support. That's how you get harmony, right? So here's the deal with marriage. You don't have to be playing the same notes. Sometimes you can take the lead. Sometimes you can support, whatever. It can be fluid. It can change. But you have to play the same song. Right? It's okay for the notes to differ. In fact, if they don't differ, it's monotonous. If they don't differ, there's no harmony. It's okay to differ. It's okay to have different notes. It's okay for you to take the lead and then me to take the lead and so forth. It's okay for us to play different notes. It's okay for us to play different instruments as long as we're playing the same song. And so what Paul is saying here, once again, this Greek word comes from the word symphony, symphonia. And if you're into linguistics, syn in Greek means together, cooperatively. What is synergy? What is synthesis? It's to collaboration, symbiotic. So Paul's saying, if you want a happy marriage, you got to be a one accord. It's like playing the symphony. Differences are okay, etc., but you gotta play the same song. You got to be on the same page for this thing to work. And the next point, and that's why I'm just going over this one quickly, the next point is, do not do anything through strife. What are the motives? How are you treating each other? How are you dealing with problems? How are you fighting? I would like to have 3 volunteers, please. Anybody, you don't have to be a couple. I need 3 people right here. I've got 3, all men. Thank you. Now, I do not want you guys to give me any details because I'm going to ask you a private question. Don't give me details. Have you ever had a fight in your life, sir?
Yes.
I'm not talking about a physical fight. I'm talking about a verbal fight,
Yes.
an argument. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. You're not human if you haven't. Okay, now, I'd like each of you to pick one of these fights that you've had anywhere in your life. It can be back in elementary school, it can be with a kid, it can be with a teacher, it can be with a spouse, it can be with a kid, doesn't matter. Pick anybody. But I want you to pick a very certain fight that you can recall in your mind. Have you got a fight?
Yes.
You got a fight. You got a fight. You got one? Okay, now, without giving me details, I'm just interested in the topic. What was the general topic of the fight about?
Violence.
Violence,
Trust.
trust,
Violence.
violence. Violence, trust, violence. Okay. Now, in the heat of the argument, when the temperature was the worst between the two of you, how did you feel? I'm looking for an emotion word. And right after the fight, how did you feel? Emotion, please.
Abandoned and reconciled.
Afraid and uncertain.
Anger in this after the fight, I was feel guilty that I didn't feel good about it.
Now, sir, your topic was violence. Please explain to me how violence can make you feel abandoned.
You're taking advantage of somebody else, and that's the meaning of others.
Oh, hold on. You're talking about somebody else. I'm talking about only violence.
Violence is an abuse of somebody else. It's an attitude that take advantage of others is wrong.
Okay, thank you. Listen closely to what he's saying. He's spot on. Listen closely to what he said. Explain to me, sir, how trust can make you feel uncertain, etc. Trust by itself, just like I try to isolate violence away from the person, violence by itself cannot make you feel abandoned. By itself. And neither can trust do that to you. And neither can violence make you feel sad or guilty by itself. My question now to you is, and you answered already, where did those feelings really come from?
From my heart.
Yeah, but what made your heart think that? What is the source of that?
The rules of my parents.
Okay. In other words, how his parents dealt with you?
Yes.
What made you feel afraid, uncertain, etc.? What was the source of that?
Past pain of being lied to or...
Aha. Notice, what's the cause? Somebody is ill-treating him.
Selfishness.
Say again?
Selfish. When that happens, I feel selfish after all.
Okay. Now, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's the deal. If we do this exercise with 1,000 people and we line 1,000 people up and we ask them, go to a fight, give me the topic, parents-in-law, finances, kids, discipline of kids, violence, trust, whatever else. Okay, in the heat of it, how did you feel? And do this exercise in your mind. In the heat of it and right after, how did you feel? Abandoned, scared, afraid, guilty, etc., etc. Well, explain to me, how can money make you feel guilty? How can money make you feel whatever? Parents-in-law. Whatever topic, as long as you're not throwing a person out there, but a topic cannot make you feel that way. It's impossible. So where do those emotions come from? They come from how you were treated by the person. They come from how you fought, or actually how the other person fought with you. Here's the deal. Most often, not always, but most often, it is not the topic we fight over that ruins relationships. It is how we fight. It is how you treat each other during the fight that harms the relationship, not the topic itself. Unless the topic itself is something like cheating or drugs, etc., that in itself creates harm, or violence that in itself creates harm. But topics that don't have power to create harm by itself, it is how we fight, how we treat each other in the fight that causes the damage in the relationship. This is a big aha moment, a crucial moment. It, it is how we deal with conflict. It is how we actually fight, how you treat that person in the fight that makes them feel that way. Excuse me. So Paul says, do not do anything through strife. Strife accomplishes nothing but harm the relationship. Look, you're not married to Mr. Perfect. And you're not perfect either. As long as you're not perfect, and you're not married to somebody who's perfect, there will be issues. That's life. But how you deal with those issues is what makes or breaks the relationship. Let me prove it another way. Remember my 1,000 people? And they all say to me, well, I got divorced because of money issues. I got divorced because of parents-in-law issues. I got divorced because of children. I got divorced because of discipline with children. I got divorced with, name it. I got divorced because of alcoholism. I got divorced of, name it, 1,000 different causes. I can turn around and face 1,000 people and say, yes, my dear people, but I can show you 100 couples that has faced the exact same issues and they're not divorced. What made the difference? And the difference is not the external things. The difference is how you as a couple deal with it that either brings you together or pushes you apart. It's how you fight, not always the things you face. This is key. I go back to my opening statement this morning. Relationships are all about how we relate. That's where the word comes from. Relationship, relate. It's plain and simple. How you treat each other, how you treat your spouse. Now, it doesn't mean that there are some obstacles that you can overcome every single obstacle. Sometimes there are no solutions for some of these things. And sometimes tough decisions need to be made. I mean, if there's violence and your life's in danger, you need to separate. Plain and simple. But all I'm saying is, it is how we treat each other that ruins the relationship. If you treat each other with love and respect, you can overcome almost anything. If you treat each other with love and respect and focus on problem solving instead of blaming and justifying, you can make it. That's why Paul says, if you want a happy marriage, do not do anything through strife, because strife accomplishes nothing but ruin the relationship. Be solution-oriented. My wife and I can argue until Jesus comes or one of us dies about the socks on the floor. Arguing is not going to pick them up. At the end of the day, we need to focus on solving the problem in a kind, nice, and loving way. And love can be tough. Sometimes you do need to make hard decisions. And as long as that decision is based on the best interest of the other person, you're good. Unless, of course, your life's in danger, etc., then, of course, you need to think of more things. Point number 6. Paul says, esteem the other better than yourself. The way you look at your spouse has a tremendous impact on the spouse itself. Can any one of you give me a definition of the word self-esteem? What is self-esteem? Anybody? Say again? A balance? A balanced self-reflection. Okay, but where does it come from? What is the self-esteem? Self-worth? Self-value? Right, so these answers are what typically are given by lay people who are not into psychology. They say it's an estimation of your worth, of your self-value, etc. It's how you feel about yourself. But that's not the psychological definition of self-esteem. Your self-esteem is really not what you think about yourself. A self-esteem is really what you think others think of you. So what does your brain use to calculate your self-esteem? It's actually very complex. Your brain throws into the mix a bunch of things and it weights them differently. Your brain looks at what just happened. It looks at the context. It looks at how close this person is to me. Once again, the guy in the corner of the street I don't know calls me names or whatever. It's not going to make my self-esteem dive down because who's he? But if somebody I trust and love says those things that are hurtful to me, it has a huge impact on me. It really hurts. So the brain calculates how close is this person to me, and depending on the closeness, it weights what happens in the context accordingly, either much weight or little weight. Secondly, it looks at the sincerity of what is being said. Is it said jokingly? Is it said sincerely? Etc., etc. It also looks at a few other things. Is what is being said just spiteful or punitive to hurt me? Or is there some truth to it? The brain does a calculation. Is what is being said true? Has it got merit? If it's got merit, it hurts me much more. If it doesn't have merit, well, I'm not going to listen to that. It's their opinion. So the brain takes all these things into account. It weights it according to all these things I've mentioned, and then spits out whether that's going to impact you or not, elevate you or decrease your self-esteem. So, based upon that, who do you think has the most power to influence your self-esteem? Yeah, but who other specifically? Your spouse. Why? Because your spouse is the closest to you. Anything your spouse says is going to impact you more than what anybody else says. So when people come into my office and we do a bunch of assessments and things, and one of the things we measure is self-esteem, because self-esteem impacts a lot in marriage. Remember I said this morning, one thing that is irresistible about a woman to a man, one thing that makes a woman attractive is confidence. So a lady that doesn't have that has self-esteem problems, she's not attractive to men. And that's why you find that people who marry people with tremendously low self-esteem have low self-esteem themselves. People with good self-esteem are only attracted to people with good self-esteem. It's the same with attachment theory, by the way. People that are securely attached typically marry people who are securely attached. There are three insecurely attached attachment styles, and typically they marry each other. But I don't have time to go into attachment styles today. So, it impacts everything. So when we do this test, we measure self-esteem. And if one person's self-esteem is low, I do not turn to that person and say, we have a problem that we need to work on here. I actually turn to the spouse. And I say, sir or ma'am, this may be hard for you to hear, but your spouse has low self-esteem. Where do you think that comes from? Now, I'm not going to accuse the person outright, because sometimes, if we've had this our whole life of growing up, we've never been good enough for our parents or whatever, the effects can last for years. And so it's not necessarily the spouse's fault right then and there. It could be parents or growing up, if it happened over and over and over for years. But typically I look at the spouse and where do you think it comes from? And then I start educating them about how self-esteem really works. And I got to say to the lady, to the fellow, you have the most power to impact your spouse's self-esteem. The fact that it's low, yeah, she may be predisposed because of the way she grew up, etc., but the ball's in your court, sir. It's not her problem. The ball's in your court, or vice versa. Be a detective and look for opportunities to appreciate, to thank, to encourage, to praise. And stop breaking the person down. Just stop. You're causing damage which you have to pay for. You have to pay for it because your marriage is not going to be happy. So, Paul clearly says here, esteem others better than yourself. That's the key. You need to esteem your spouse better than yourself. And when you treat them such and you make them feel such, their self-esteem goes up, and there's many benefits to that. Esteem your spouse higher than yourself. Now, I'm not sure, what's your name again, ma'am? Clara? Clara asked me if we're going to have a question and answer session. Now, when I started doing marriage seminars, I did that, and I stopped doing so. And there's a very good reason why I do not take questions from the audience when I do marriage seminars. Because a person will stand up and asks a question that throws their spouse under the bus in front of everybody. And just the asking of that question does so much damage, there's nothing I can say to undo what's been done. So, when I present marriage seminars, I do take questions, but in an anonymous box in the back, where nobody can see who puts in what, so that when I read it, it's not apparent who we're talking about. But I've literally had people stand up with a packed audience in front of everybody, ask, my wife withholds sexuality from me. What can I do to increase it? And the wife's sitting right there. And that's a mild one, by the way. I've had stuff. You cannot believe the stuff that has been asked in public. People will get up and say, literally, I kid you not, I've had this one. My wife beats me and ill-treats me. How should I deal with it? And the wife's sitting there. When Paul says, esteem the other better than yourselves, it also includes speaking well of them. You can't be breaking your spouse down and expect a happy marriage. You need to speak well of your spouse. If you don't have anything good to say, then rather say nothing. Quite often, people come into my office and they have a list of complaints from here to Cairo about their spouse. And I just have one question for them. Ma'am or sir, why did you marry this person? You did not know some of these things when you got married? Stop breaking each other down. Stop looking at the negatives. Problem solve them. Find solutions for them. But speak well of your spouse. Esteem your spouse higher than yourself. And then the last point, I have a few other things to share as well, but the last point of Paul's text, consider other people's things or matters. Consider your spouse's things or matters. Paul says it this way, but each man also, do not let each man look upon his own things, but each man look on the things of others. Now, of course, Paul's not speaking about marriage here. He's speaking about life in general. I'm just applying it to marriage. But the principle is simple. Don't just care for or look at your own things. Look at the things of others. Are you interested in that which your spouse is important to your spouse? Are you only in it for what you can get or for what you can give? By the way, we have the same problem with church. Many people don't want to come to church because they don't get something they're looking for. But that's not why we come to church. We come to church to give, worship to God to begin with, and to serve others who need us. We don't come to get. Now, if everybody serves other people, you will be served. But you don't come to get. I read article upon article upon article about the reason the Christian church is not growing is because we're no longer relevant. We're not relevant because of the type of sermons, or because of the type of music, or because of the vocab we're using words and concepts that the people no longer understand or talking about, and organ music, and they go on and on about all these reasons why the church is not growing. And I read every one of those articles and I'm saying, you're talking nonsense. Here's my logic, follow me. If you were to get cancer tomorrow and your doctor refers you to an oncologist, would you stop going to that oncologist because you don't like his office? Would you stop going to that oncologist because the receptionist isn't kind? Let's say she's plain rude and mean with you. Will you stop going? What about the background music? It's terrible rap or whatever that you absolutely detest and hate and you can't stand. Will you stop going? What about him using a language? He's using terms and things you don't understand. Will you stop going? No. Why not? Why, no matter almost what they do, will you keep going? Exactly. You have a need. He has the possible answer. It's plain and simple. The reason why the church is not relevant today is not because of the music, it's not because of the terminology, etc., it's because people don't think they have a problem anymore. The reason why I don't go and visit oncologists is because I don't have cancer. I don't have the need. But believe me, if I'm told I have cancer tomorrow, I'll be in his office the next day. Does this make sense? The world has stopped calling sin, sin. Everything's okay. And as long as I'm a good person, not harming anybody else, I'm good and safe, no problem. The minute you think you don't have cancer, you don't go to the oncologist. It's that simple. There's nothing wrong with the oncologist's office. Yes, the lady can be kinder. Yes, he can play nicer music. Yes, he can do all those things. But if you were to buy the nicest office building and play the most beautiful music and get this beautiful little receptionist, the most kind person on earth, etc., do you think it's going to draw people that don't have cancer? I'm off topic. But the principle is what I'm talking about. Consider other people's matters and things, because all people have needs. If you supply those needs, they will come. Or in marriage, if you supply those needs, there will be bliss. We're so often in it for ourselves, considering our own joy, our own things, our own interests. I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Paul says reverse it. Think about the other person's matters, not about your own. And you'll have a great marriage. As long as both of you do that, your needs will be met. The problem comes in when only one's doing that. And then I'm going to say, you don't have the same love. You're not both investing equally. As long as you do all 7, you'll be great. I'll end this afternoon with the last little section and say, by the way, if you look at these 7, be honest and say to yourself, which ones of these 7 do I violate? Am I really studying my spouse and genuinely trying to fulfill their joy and their dreams? Am I really like-minded? In other words, are we genuinely a team? Or am I constantly attacking, etc.? Number 3, am I invested as much as my spouse? Do we have the same love? Number 4, are we playing the same song? Are we of one accord, or do we always have discord? Number 5, how do I deal with conflict and problems? With strife, with fighting, or focusing on the problem and getting solutions? Number 6, am I esteeming my spouse as better than myself? Or do I look at her and say, gee, I got a raw deal? Number 7, am I considering the other person's things as more important than my own? And not just things, matters. Which of these are you violating? If you look at Eastern countries where there's arranged marriages, statistics say that those marriages last longer than our marriages. How is it possible that two people can get together that don't know each other, that haven't met each other, that spend 5 minutes together, and then they get married? And those marriages last. And here we hand select somebody that we are supposedly madly in love with, and it doesn't work out, and we quit. Why? How does this work? How is that even possible? And yet the research is strong. We're not talking about 1 or 2 arranged marriages. There are millions upon millions of them. The entire India, with 1 billion people, have arranged marriages. All your Arab countries have arranged marriages. How can that be? What makes the difference? We've only found one major difference, and the difference is this. It's the mindset with which you go into the marriage to begin with. We go into the marriage with the mindset, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just try something else. But that mindset with an exit door makes you go to the exit door whenever trouble comes. We give up. That mindset changes how much I'm willing to endure when tough times come, etc., etc. That mindset makes me look at grass being greener on the other side, etc., etc. It changes everything in the marriage. Whereas these other guys don't have a choice. If they get divorced, they're ostracized. They have no space in society. Their own family will discard them. They're toast. So the mindset with which they go into the marriage is, I don't know you, I've only met you for 5 minutes. But this thing has to work because I have no other option. If it doesn't work, I'm toast. Just that mindset. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not advocating that kind of marriage. I'm just saying the marriage with which you go, the mindset with which you go into the marriage has a direct effect on what's going to happen in the marriage and if that marriage is going to last. You'll notice that a lot of these things are talking about mindset. Analyze them. Number 1, fulfill somebody else's joy. Okay, that can be behavioral. Number 2, be like-minded. Oh, that's definitely mindset. Number 3, same love. That's mindset. Number 4, one accord. Oh, that's mindset, very clearly. Number 5, strife. That's behavior. Number 6, esteem other people. That's in the mind. Number 7, consider other people's things, etc. Consider, that's in the mind. All but 2 of these have to do with mindset. And mindset changes everything. I don't have time today, but I can give you an entire seminar on mindset differences between men and women based upon negative stereotypes that ruin relationships. And I can prove to you that most of those stereotypes are false. And yet we believe them as fact, and they negatively impact our marriages. Change the mindset. So, let's move on to the last section. Ladies, I'm speaking to you. The number 1 fear that men have in any relationship from women is the fear of being controlled. Everything in a man's mind, his brain is wired for independence. If you take away that independence and start controlling him, he feels castrated, emasculated. It's that strong. Ladies, if you want a happy man, you can't be controlling him. Control him so that he doesn't know you're controlling him. Do things in such a way that he thinks it's his idea. Don't command him. Ask it in the form of the question. There's a big difference between saying, take out the trash, or would you please take out the trash? Even without the word please, would you take out the trash? It's much different than take out the trash. One's a command, one's a question. Think very clearly how you treat your men. The minute they sense that they're being controlled, you have problems. Men can't take it because their whole brains are wired for independence. Let me give you a quick story. Once again, if you attended previous seminars, I'm sorry. Ladies, you're busy doing the dishes. You're almost done. You just have a few left. You don't need help. But you've not seen him all day and he's busy doing his thing, and you want to bond and chat, etc. So you call him over to come and help you so that you can be together. So he's sitting there doing whatever he's doing. You say, honey, can you please come help me with the dishes? Yeah, okay, it'll be there in a minute. Why doesn't he get up and come immediately? Have you ever thought about that? A man is driven with independence. He's got to make the decision. He will come on his terms, at his time. So he waits because he's got to demonstrate that it's his decision. He's got to demonstrate that he decides to come. So you wait. And after 4 minutes, 5 minutes, he hasn't come. So what do, ladies? You ask him again. The minute you ask him again, what have you just done? You've reset the clock. You've reset the clock. Now he's got to wait another 4 or 5 minutes to come. Men are wired for independence. Now, once again, men, let me just warn you. Remember this morning, you can't do your own thing independently for too much and expect an intimate relationship. It's not going to happen. If you want emotional intimacy, you got to get into each other's hearts. So, by all means, recharge your batteries for a while, but get to her and commune and chat. Ladies, be careful about controlling men. If you look at Ephesians chapter 5, Paul specifically addresses marriage. The context is very clearly marriage. Men and women, here's how you treat each other in marriage. Paul addresses the wives first, and he says, wives, submit yourself to your husbands. Now, I know you hate that text. But why do you think Paul says that? Paul says that because he knows that men cannot be controlled and be happy. So the best solution is for you to rather submit than to control. But I want you to notice something. Submit yourselves to your husbands as to the Lord. That means that you're only required to submit for that which the Lord would demand. Because you only submit as unto the Lord. If you would not submit this to the Lord, you should not submit this to your husband. If your husband wants you to do something that is wrong or something that you don't submit to that, it's limited to that which is only acceptable to Christ. So just bearing that in mind, the text does not stop there. It doesn't say submit to your husband, period. So therefore, you better do whatever he says. No. You submit to him as to the Lord. But the reason why it starts that way for women is because men cannot handle being controlled. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Now, of course, remember Paul also is writing this to a culture that is male-dominated. It's a patriarchal society, so much so that you can be 60 years old, you can be a male, and you still cannot buy and sell property without your father's consent. It's all patriarchal driven. When you marry, you build onto your father's house. Your wife comes and lives with you, with your parents. It's very patriarchal in New Testament, Old and New Testament times. So I'm not saying that in our society we have to be like that because that's also cultural. It's not necessarily directed from God. But very clearly, he clearly says here, talking on this thing of control, woman, it is better for you to submit than to control. And you'll notice when he now starts addressing the men, he doesn't tell them the same thing. Because a woman does not have the same need. Men, can you guess what one of the top fears are for women? Men, here it is. The number one fear for women is the fear of being abandoned. That you're not going to be there for me. That your commitment's not strong enough. Because of that, Paul now continues in verse 25 and onwards. Husbands, love your wives. What is this love? How does this love work? He qualifies it. Even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. In other words, sacrificial love. This is a deep, costly love. Husbands, sacrificially love your wives. Give them and do for them even if you don't like it. It's sacrificial. Remember, how did Christ give himself? Do you remember what he prayed in the garden? Father, if at all this is possible, let this cup pass from me. Jesus didn't volunteer and say, oh yes, I can't wait, bring it on. He knew that he was going to feel God forsaken and lost. He knew he was going to be saddled with all of our sins on the cross. He pleaded 3 times, God, take this away from me. Let not this happen. But he always ends the prayer with, but your will be done, not mine. So when Paul says, love your wives sacrificially as Christ sacrificed for us, that means even if you don't like it, even if it's difficult for you, love your wives that way. He continues. That Christ presents the word, and he might present to himself the glorious church without spot or wrinkle and such things, and that it should be holy and without blemish. And here comes the punchline. So men ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. I'm going to end with 4 quick texts. You can write them down. I'm not going to read them all. I'm just going to read the punchline. Galatians 5:13. And once again, I know I'm taking these texts out of context. I'm applying them to marriage. They might not necessarily speak about marriage, but I'm applying them to marriage. I'm warning you. I'm doing something which theologians are not supposed to do. I'm taking it out of context. But I'm doing so because the lesson applies and is true regarding marriage. Galatians 5:13. For brothers, you are called to liberty. Only do not use the liberty for an opening to the flesh, but by love serve one another. So yes, you don't need to be controlled. You can have freedom, but don't let that lead to sin. Love by serving one another. That's key. Reciprocity is the key. Text number 2, 1 John 3:16-18. I'm just going to read the last line there. Let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Guys, ladies, I cannot tell you how many couples come to my office and then they have some complaint, and at the end of our discussion I get him or her to agree that henceforth they're going to deal with it this way, or henceforth this is not going to happen, this is going to happen. And whenever we reach that point, the spouse that has been harmed says, oh no, I've heard that 1,000,000 times before. No matter what I say, nothing will make a difference. Remember my trust story about borrowing money? Heard that one before. No, he has promised 50 times before he's not going to drink. Oh, he's promised 50 times he's not going to hit me. Oh, he's promised 50 times. Every time he says he's sorry. Every time he says he'll never do it again. But guess what? A day later, it's back. The Bible says, let us not love in word or in tongue, lip service, but let us love in deed and in truth. If you truly love, you will be a man and a woman of your word. If you say, I will not do this again, you need to pray and genuinely work on it so that you don't do it again. Because the minute you don't, what reason does your spouse have to believe any promise you make? The trust is gone. I can promise this guy 50 times that I'm going to pay him back. The minute I've not paid him back once or twice, the trust is gone. No matter what I say is going to make any difference. Why? Because my actions proved different. If there's no congruency between what people say and what they do, which one of the two do you believe? Absolutely. Actions win speech any day of the week. You can say whatever you want, doesn't matter. So, Scripture tells us we ought to love indeed by doing, not by lip service. Text 3, 1 Timothy 1:5. But the end of the commandment is love out of a pure heart and a good conscience and faith unfeigned. Love out of a pure heart and a good conscience. What does that mean? Your motives need to be pure. Love the person for who the person is, not for what you can get. And then the last text, Proverbs 10, verse 12. Hatred stirs up fights, but love covers all sins. Love makes you blind. When you're in love, you don't see the faults. Now, many people say that marriage is the glasses that make you see. Love makes you blind, but marriage is glasses that make you see. But if you're truly in love, it should cover sins. It should make you blind to the faults of your spouse. Most people in their marriages, that's all they see. They just see the faults. They just see the problems. They just see the things the spouse does to irritate them. And that's all they focus on. How about just deciding not to see those anymore and to be looking for the things you enjoy, to be looking for the things that are positive, to be looking for the things you fell in love with in the first place? Change the mindset. I'm going to end there, Pastor. It is 5 o'clock. Shall we pray? Dear Lord, we thank you so much for creating us, man and wife. Teach us this day to make a difference, a positive difference, to just elevate our marriages to even higher levels. Lord, make every marriage represented here a foretaste of heaven marriage. Help us to love indeed, not just with words and empty promises. Help us to esteem others more than ourselves. Help us to speak well of our spouses. Help us to love them, to accept them. Help us to be a team and of one accord and one mind, a unit together. For it was you who said, we shall become one. Please bless our marriages, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.